When you think of Brazil, you probably picture images like this: bright sunshine, packed beaches, and a lively mix of people from diverse ethnic backgrounds. And while Brazil certainly has this ethnic mix across the country, some of its landscapes and architecture tell a very different story. These buildings, with their partially exposed timber framework and steep roofs designed to prevent the accumulation of snow, appear as though they are located in an alpine ski resort, while others look like Bavarian chalets. But this is actually the Brazilian city of Gramado, one of many colonial cities founded and built by European migrants. Upon visiting the small towns surrounding Gramado, such as Santa Maria do Herval, I kind of felt like I had travelled through time, not only because it appeared so unlike the Brazil I knew, but also because some people seemed to have different accents when speaking Portuguese, and, I discovered, even communicated using dialects of the German language that I thought were no longer used.
Muss man immer ein bisschen schaffen. Hat man immer was zu tun. Mach es aber gern. Meine Mama hat immer gesagt, dass Arbeit nicht das Leben ist. Und das ist er. Wenn man schaffen kann, ist alles schön.
Sprich 3 só de tarde.
3 só de Deutsch.
Was für?
Kaffeepflegers, Deutsch und Hochdeutsch.
Und wie viel só de tarde spricht er?
Hier gibt's so eine 6, 7 verschiedene Sprachen.
Oh,
Und die ist mir alle egal. Die verstehe ich und spreche auch sie alle.
was sind dann die 6?
Ja, wie man sie nennen soll, das kann ich Ihnen nicht sagen. Es ist Plattdeutsch verschiedener Arten.
The traditions being preserved and honoured with such pride were ones I strongly associated with rural Germany. I was thoroughly intrigued, asking myself how this came to be, and eventually discovered that the reason these amazing cities and communities exist in Brazil today dates back 200 years, to a Europe gripped by war, poverty and chaos. The territory we now recognise as Germany was a fragmented patchwork of states back in 1800, far from the unified and wealthy nation it is today. It would be more accurate to refer to the Germanic people spread across a much larger area than modern Germany. In fact, there were over 300 separate and independent entities, each ruled by royalty or church officials, often with their own laws, currencies and trade systems. And while this was a relatively stable period for the Germanic region, over in France, Napoleon Bonaparte had just risen to power through a military coup. He promised to spread revolutionary ideals across Europe, vowing to dismantle the entrenched power of monarchies and the church. By 1805, he was attacking the Germanic territory, and in 1806, the central governing power of this territory, the Holy Roman Empire, was dissolved. And while fighting had ended, the impact of war would be felt for years to come. Fields where vital food supplies were grown were neglected. Trade routes that allowed people to earn a living had been severely disrupted, and widespread conscription depleted villages of their young men, leaving communities impoverished. Villages, which had steadily grown as a way of life through the 17th century, now saw many farmers struggling to sustain their families. Urban centres offered little reprieve, providing only limited jobs with low wages and harsh working conditions, even for those fleeing rural poverty. With little hope and no clear path to meeting essential needs, many were forced to contemplate a future beyond their homeland. While Europe was embroiled in war, across the Atlantic, the colony of Brazil emerged as a crucial economic lifeline for Portugal, supplying vital resources like sugar, gold, and later coffee. These exports helped sustain Portugal's economy, ensuring its survival as a major global trader despite the chaos gripping Europe. Napoleon's war with Germany was just the start. After establishing the Confederation of the Rhine in 1806, he attacked and defeated the Prussian kingdom, as well as secured Russia as an ally, at least for now, through the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807. Next, he wanted the European continent to unite against the powerful British Empire and sought to blockade their ships through the continental system, an economic strategy to cut Britain off from trade with Europe. However, Portugal, bound by a long-standing alliance with Britain, refused to support the blockade. and while Portugal hoped to remain neutral, Napoleon instead attacked with Spanish support in 1807. This attack took the Portuguese government by surprise. Initially hesitant to flee, the royal family ultimately decided to escape to Brazil when it became clear that French troops would soon reach Lisbon.
Portugal não fizer o que eu quero, a Casa de Bragança não reinará mais na Europa dentro de 2 meses. Este foi o recado de Napoleão, Alteza. Alteza,
Eu preciso de tempo para pensar.
não temos mais tempo. A família real precisa fazer a sua mudança para ultramar. É fundamental a defesa do espaço atlântico português, a integridade da metrópole e do império, sem deixar de lado a fidelidade e a proteção para com os ingleses.
Está sugerindo que a corte fuja do Rodrigo?
Não, só até os ânimos se acalmarem.
O Império Português pode ser governado de qualquer uma dessas colônias, da África,
Da Ásia, do Brasil.
As informações que eu tenho da França, e Vossa Alteza sabe das excelentes ligações que tenho com o povo francês, me levam a crer que essa sugestão é absurda. É um passo muito arriscado.
Está sendo contraditório. O argumento para uma aproximação com os franceses é justamente o medo e a recusa da revolução.
Vossa Alteza, acabo de receber o jornal de Napoleão. As tropas francesas chegaram a Abrantes.
Casa Bragança cessa de reinar. Não é possível! Diga para os criados reunirem tudo o que puderem o mais rápido possível e em segredo. Em 3 dias, a família real inteira partirá para o Brasil. Deixe-me.
Under protection of the British Navy, a fleet carrying an estimated 10,000 people, including royalty, nobles, officials and their households, set sail from Lisbon on the 29th of November 1807. As soon as the royal family arrived, Brazil began to modernise. It opened its ports to international trade and had its status elevated from colony to a United Kingdom in 1815. This granted it political equality with Portugal and freedom over economic policy. As a result, Brazil felt it held more prestige as a nation, increased nationalist feeling, and laid the groundwork for its eventual independence. The royal court returned to Portugal in 1821, and King João VI left his son Dom Pedro I to rule the Brazilian kingdom with the title of regent. The king attempted to reassert control over Brazil like a colony, as he had before 1807. However, nationalist sentiment had grown, and the elites in Brazil resented the attempts to revert to colonial treatment. Perhaps surprisingly, with Dom Pedro having spent so many of his formative years in Brazil, he not only had close ties to Brazilian high society, but actually wanted to stay there and defied the royal family and Portuguese parliament to do so. This culminated in the dismissal of Portuguese troops from Brazil and an eventual declaration of independence from Portugal in 1822, made by Dom Pedro himself. To maintain order and avoid the fragmentation seen in Spanish-American colonies, the Brazilian elite supported him remaining as emperor of the newly independent nation. His vision was to keep Brazil as a unified country and develop it to the point where it would be economically independent. And to achieve this, he knew that the country needed a robust agricultural base. While Brazil had huge plantations run using slave labour, there were also large parts of the country that were still unpopulated but with huge potential for development. A large part of such land was along the southern frontier of Brazil, which was vulnerable to territorial disputes with neighbouring Spanish-speaking nations such as Argentina and Uruguay. And so what Dom Pedro needed was people with agricultural skills who were prepared to act as pioneers, moving to new and undeveloped parts of Brazil for a fresh start. As you can no doubt see, the Germanic peoples displaced by the Napoleonic Wars were potentially a great match, and efforts began to proactively recruit and settle groups of Europeans in these regions. Dom Pedro initiated this process by commissioning Major Georg Anton von Schaefer, a well-known emissary and loyalist to the emperor. Schaefer was sent to Europe to find interested emigrants, To appeal to potential settlers, Schaefer offered attractive incentives funded by the Brazilian government. These included paid transport, 75 hectares of free land, food for the first year, clothing, livestock, exemption from taxes, religious freedom, and Brazilian citizenship. This package was undoubtedly enticing to impoverished Europeans. Another factor that may have appealed to some contemplating immigration from Europe was Dom Pedro's wife, Empress Maria Leopoldina. She was Archduchess of Austria before her marriage to Dom Pedro, which was arranged to strengthen ties between the Portuguese and Austrian royal families. The Archduchess was now Empress of Brazil and actively supported Brazil's modernization and independence efforts, including initiatives to encourage skilled European immigration as a way to stimulate agricultural and economic development. Her connection to Germanic Europeans, added to Schaefer's recruitment initiatives, created a cohesive strategy to attract settlers to Brazil. By 1824, enough potential emigrants had been identified in the Pessa, Bavaria, and Palatinate regions to proceed with the first direct settlement, and 39 people from 9 families set sail on the ship Protector from Hamburg in March 1824. The journey across the Atlantic Ocean alone would take an estimated 3 months. However bad things were in their homeland, the decision to undertake the treacherous and completely unknown journey to a land thousands of miles away, likely never seeing some of your family or your homeland ever again, must have been enormously difficult.
Como é que eram esses colonos que vinham para cá, que chegaram em São Leopoldo em 24?
Olha, eu acho que eram colonos que tinham coragem, em primeiro lugar, para deixar de tudo lá, porque por pior que seja, tu sabe o que tem. Pode esperar que tenha muito mais coisas, mas tu não sabe. E eles tinham muita coragem, até porque a viagem foi longa. E a gente sabe que chegaram 39 imigrantes, mas lá só saíram 38. Um bebê nasceu na viagem. Então imagina, uma mulher grávida vai ter o bebê na viagem. Isso não é para qualquer uma.
In a fascinating insight into the emotional toll this took on migrants, a handwritten notebook found in 1825 contains a song said to have been sung by those leaving. Here is part of it, which so artistically and poetically captures those sentiments.
Weil durch diesen Umstand beschreiben wir den Pfad. Es fliehen all die Jungen, die Zukunft wird verbannt. So suchen wir den Frieden in dem Brasilienland. Schaut auf, ihr Unterdrücker, seht, wie wir Deutsche fliehen. Lebt wohl, ihr Volksbetrüger, Gott ist uns nun erschienen. Es bot Brasiliens Kaiser zur Hilfe uns die Hand. Herrscht mit wahrer Güte in dem Brasilienland. Durch Tag und Nacht wir fahren durchs weite wilde Meer. Und vielen jungen Jahren ist nun das Herz so schwer. So viele stolze Klimper hielten dem Sturm nicht an. Gefährlich ist die Reise in das Brasilienland.
After arriving in Rio de Janeiro, they travelled by land to a deactivated factory in Rio Grande do Sul for temporary accommodation, where they arrived on the 25th of July 1824. The settlement that eventually emerged was named São Leopoldo, in honour of Empress Maria Leopoldina, reflecting her role in supporting immigration and development in Brazil. These initial months were incredibly harsh. Although the newcomers received basic rations, settlement guidance and land allocations, they faced extremely difficult living conditions. The biggest issues were isolation and climate. Their distance from any kind of infrastructure meant they had to be wholly self-sufficient to survive, as well as needing to adapt to a very much hotter climate and diverse terrain from that of Germany. The only way to overcome these difficulties was extreme resilience and toughness, with the group relying on communal efforts and familial support to survive day by day. Another immense challenge was clearing dense forest land to create space for agriculture and housing. Most of the work was done by hand, using rudimentary tools to build simple homes and prepare land for farming. The initial crops planted, corn, beans, cassava, and potatoes, were specifically chosen for their suitability to thrive in the environment of southern Brazil, but also to provide sustenance to the settlers themselves. The group had to construct basic infrastructure such as storage sheds and crude pathways to connect different parts of the settlement. This required resources to be pooled, with settlers planning and working together to divide tasks and share tools. A small chapel was also constructed as a meeting place that became the heart of the community. These areas were essential for maintaining morale and fostering unity in the face of adversity. As more immigrants arrived, São Leopoldo gradually expanded. Additional land was allocated to new settlers, and homes were built to accommodate the growing population. In Rio Grande do Sul, the new settlements of Três Forquilhas and Dom Pedro de Alcântara were established in 1826, and some of the settlers from São Leopoldo moved to the newly established colony of Santa Maria in 1827. However, in Rio Grande do Sul, there was little focus on establishing new, organised settlements, as the Cisplanting War and the Farroupilha Revolution were being fought and would come to take up much of the attention and resources of central government. Instead, Schaefer shifted his focus to recruiting soldiers and mercenaries for the war, while small-scale immigration continued in the south to the colonies already established. But some settlement efforts did take place in other regions. In 1829, the colony of Santo Amaro was established in the state of São Paulo by Hunsrück migrants, and in 1837, the city of Petrópolis was founded in the state of Rio de Janeiro by Germans from various regions.